The first loaf appeared on a rainy Thursday morning in early spring, tucked beneath the back step of the bakery where rainwater pooled in the uneven stones. And Adrian Quincy found it only because his daughter had been chasing the barn cat through the alley and spotted the cloth-wrapped bundle wedged into the shadowed gap, like a secret someone had been desperate to keep. Mira was 6 years old, gap-toothed and relentlessly curious, with her mother's dark curls and her father's inability to leave a mystery alone. She came charging through the back door with the loaf clutched to her chest, trailing muddy footprints across the flagstones Adrian had scrubbed clean not an hour before, her eyes wide with the particular excitement children reserve for discoveries adults have somehow missed. "Papa, Papa, look what I found," she announced, breathless and triumphant, holding the bundle out like a trophy. "There's bread under the step, good bread, still warm." Adrian had been elbow-deep in dough, preparing the morning's second batch of rolls, and he paused with his hands suspended over the work table, flour dusting his forearms up to the elbows. He was 32 years old, broad-shouldered from years of kneading and hauling sacks of grain, with sandy hair that refused to stay out of his eyes, and a face his late wife had once called aggressively cheerful. 3 years without her had not dimmed that particular quality, though it had taught him to bake alone at odd hours when the silence felt less heavy. "Warm bread under our step," he repeated slowly, frowning at the contradiction. "You're certain it was under the step, not near it?" "Maybe someone dropped it on their way to market." Mira shook her head so vigorously her curls whipped across her face. "Under it, Papa. Hidden. Like someone put it there on purpose and didn't want anyone to see." Adrian wiped his hands on his apron and crossed the kitchen to examine the bundle his daughter had deposited on the clean end of the work table. The cloth was simple homespun, clean but worn, wrapped with the practiced efficiency of someone who knew how to keep bread fresh. He unfolded it carefully, and the scent that rose from within made him pause. The loaf was round and golden, with a crackling crust that had been scored in a precise crosshatch pattern. The crumb, visible where Mira's enthusiastic handling had slightly crushed one end, was even and tender, the color of honey in afternoon sunlight. Adrian had been a baker since his father had taught him to proof yeast at age 7, and he knew quality when he saw it. This was not ordinary bread. This was the work of someone who understood grain and heat and time with the intimacy of true craft. "Well," he said quietly, turning the loaf in his hands, "someone's been practicing." "Can we eat it?" Mira asked hopefully. "Absolutely not. We don't know where it came from." Adrian rewrapped the loaf and set it aside, then crouched to his daughter's eye level. "Show me exactly where you found this, Mouse." They went together into the alley behind the bakery, where the morning sun had not yet burned off the night's rain, and puddles reflected the pale sky in fragments. The back step was a single slab of worn granite, hollowed slightly in the center by generations of feet, and beneath it was a gap perhaps 6 inches high where the stone had settled unevenly against the foundation. Mira pointed into the shadow with the solemnity of a guide revealing a sacred site. "There. You have to lie down to see it properly, but it's tucked way back, like someone wanted to make sure the rain wouldn't get it." Adrian knelt and peered into the gap. Sure enough, there was a dry patch against the foundation where the stone overhang provided shelter, just large enough to cradle a wrapped loaf. He could see scuff marks in the dirt, as though something had been placed and removed repeatedly, wearing a shallow depression into the earth. "How many times have you checked under here?" he asked, a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Mira had the grace to look slightly sheepish. "The cat likes to hide there sometimes. I was just looking for him." "Hum. And the cat was there this morning?" "No, just the bread." Adrian sat back on his heels, considering. Someone had been leaving bread at his doorstep, hidden where it would not be noticed by casual passers-by, but might be found by someone small and determined. The care taken with the wrapping, the warmth that suggested the loaf had been baked within the last few hours, the quality of the work itself, all of it spoke to intention and skill. But why leave it anonymously? And why here, at the bakery of all places, where bread was hardly in short supply? "Well," he said at last, standing and brushing dirt from his knees, "I suppose if it happens again, we'll know it wasn't an accident." It happened again the next morning and the morning after that, and every morning for the next 2 weeks without fail. Each loaf was slightly different. One day a rustic sourdough with a thick, chewy crust. Another day a softer white loaf enriched with milk and a touch of honey. Once, a dark rye studded with caraway seeds that filled the alley with their sharp, clean scent. Adrian began checking the hiding spot himself each dawn, and he began to recognize the hand behind the work. Whoever was leaving these loaves had not just skill but a deep, abiding love for the craft, the kind that came from understanding bread not as a commodity, but as a conversation between flour and water and time. He asked around the village carefully, not wanting to sound either ungrateful or suspicious. The territory was frontier land, settled only 30 years ago when the war with the Eastern Kingdoms had finally ground to a halt, and veterans had been granted plots along the border in lieu of pensions. The village of Millcrest had grown up around the river crossing, a practical place of farmers and craftsmen and merchants who made their living from the trade road that ran north to the human capitals and south into the disputed territories, where orcs and goblins and stranger folk still held their ground. It was not a large community. If someone had been baking bread of this quality, Adrian should have known about it, but no one he spoke to had any idea what he was talking about. The other bakers in Millcrest, there were 2. Both older men who supplied the tavern and the weekly market, looked at him as though he had invented the mystery for attention. His neighbors had not seen anyone lingering near the bakery at odd hours. Even the night watchman, who made his rounds past Adrian's door 3 times between midnight and dawn, reported nothing unusual. "Maybe it's a brownie," Mira suggested one evening as Adrian prepared supper, and she sat at the kitchen table with her slate, practicing her letters. "Mama used to say brownies would help with chores if you left them cream." "Brownies don't bake bread," Adrian said, though he smiled at the memory. His wife had been fond of the old stories, the ones about household spirits and luck, and the magic that supposedly lingered in the world's corners. He had always been more practical, but he had loved listening to her tell them, her voice soft and warm in the firelight. "And we haven't been leaving cream. Maybe they're helping anyway because they like you. Or maybe it's a neighbor with too much time and flour." But Adrian did not really believe that, and as the days passed and the mystery deepened, he found himself thinking about the bread at odd moments while he kneaded his own dough, while he tallied the week's accounts, while he lay in bed at night and listened to the house settle around him. The loaves were always perfect, always distinct, always left with the same careful secrecy. Whoever was doing this wanted him to have the bread but did not want to be thanked or acknowledged. It was a gift given purely for the giving, and that kind of generosity was rare enough to be remarkable. On the 15th morning, Adrian woke an hour earlier than usual and positioned himself at the high window in the bakery's upper storeroom, where he had a clear view of the alley below. The sky was still dark, the stars fading into the deep blue of pre-dawn, and the village was silent except for the distant crow of a rooster and the rustle of wind in the eaves. He wrapped himself in a blanket and settled in to wait, feeling slightly foolish but too curious to care. He nearly missed her. The light was still dim when a figure slipped into the alley, moving with the fluid quiet of someone accustomed to not being seen. Adrian leaned forward, squinting, and his breath caught when the figure stepped into the faint glow of the neighbor's lantern. She was an orc. There was no mistaking it, even in the uncertain light. Green skin, darker than spring leaves and lighter than forest moss, visible where her hood had slipped back to reveal a fall of black hair tied in a simple braid. She was small for her kind. Adrian had seen orc soldiers during his brief and inglorious stint in the territorial militia, and they had been uniformly towering and broad, but there was no doubt about what she was. The shape of her ears, the slight protrusion of lower tusks just visible when she ducked her head, the compact strength in her shoulders as she knelt by the back step, all marked her as clearly as a banner. She moved quickly, pulling a cloth-wrapped bundle from the satchel slung across her body and tucking it into the hiding spot beneath the step with practiced efficiency. Her hands were careful, adjusting the cloth to make sure the bread was protected, and even from his high vantage point, Adrian could see the tension in her posture, the way she kept glancing over her shoulder as though expecting to be discovered and driven off. Then she was gone, slipping back down the alley and disappearing into the shadows before Adrian could so much as call out. He stood frozen at the window, the blanket slipping from his shoulders, his mind racing to catch up with what he had just witnessed. An orc. The bread had been left by an orc. Not just any orc, but one who baked with a skill that rivaled anything Adrian could produce, and who had been coming to his bakery every morning for weeks to leave gifts. She clearly did not expect to be acknowledged. The realization struck him with the force of something both obvious and impossible, and he found himself gripping the windowsill as though the world had tilted beneath his feet. "Papa." Mira's voice drifted up the stairs, sleepy and confused. "Why are you awake? It's still dark." Adrian shook himself and descended to the kitchen, where his daughter stood in her nightgown, rubbing her eyes. He lifted her onto his hip even though she was getting too big for it, needing the warmth and weight of her to anchor him to the ordinary world. "Just checking on something, Mouse." "Go back to bed. I'll wake you when it's time for breakfast." But he could not stop thinking about the orc woman as he went through the motions of his morning routine, building up the fire in the ovens and mixing the first batches of dough. An orc, baking bread in secret and leaving it for him to find. It made no sense. Orcs in Milcrest were rare, tolerated at best and actively shunned at worst, remnants of the war that had ended decades ago but had never quite been forgiven. They lived on the edges of the village, taking work no one else wanted, and they certainly did not bake bread of the quality Adrian had been receiving. Unless, he thought slowly, they did. Unless there was an orc in Milcrest who had learned the craft somewhere, somehow, and who was good enough to rival any human baker. And if that were true, why was she leaving her work at his door instead of selling it? Why hide something so clearly valuable? The question nagged at him all through the day as he served customers and filled orders, and listened to Mira chatter about the bird's nest she had found in the apple tree. By the time evening came and he had closed the shop and cleaned the kitchen, he had made a decision. If the orc woman was going to leave him bread, the least he could do was return the favor. It was only polite. And if, in the process, he happened to learn more about who she was and why she was doing this, well, that was just a fortunate side effect. He stayed up late that night, long after Mira had gone to bed, and baked a batch of his best honey cake small. Golden rounds studded with almonds and glazed with a mixture of honey and rosewater that his wife had taught him to make in the early days of their marriage. They were delicate and sweet, the kind of thing he usually reserved for weddings and festival days, and he packed them carefully in a clean linen cloth before slipping out into the cool night air. The mill stood at the eastern edge of the village, where the river narrowed and ran fast over a bed of smooth stones. It was an old building, weathered and gray, with a water wheel that groaned as it turned and a chimney that leaked smoke in thin, hesitant wisps. Adrian had passed it 100 times and never paid it much attention. It was just part of the landscape, as permanent and unremarkable as the bridge or the boundary stones. But now, standing in the road with his bundle of honey cakes and the knowledge of who lived there, he saw it differently. The mill looked tired. The thatch on the roof needed patching, and the door hung slightly crooked on its hinges, and there were weeds growing up between the foundation stones where mortar had crumbled away. It was the kind of slow decay that spoke of limited resources and hard choices, of someone trying to maintain a structure alone when it really required a crew. Adrian felt a pang of sympathy, unexpected and sharp, and he approached the door with a new kind of caution. There was no hiding spot as convenient as the gap beneath his back step, so he simply left the bundle on the doorstep, tucked against the frame where it would be found first thing in the morning. He paused for a moment, listening to the rush of the river and the creak of the wheel, and then he turned and walked back to the village, his heart beating faster than the exercise warranted. The next morning, the bread beneath his step was a braided loaf, golden and glossy with egg wash, and Adrian grinned like a fool when he unwrapped it. The morning after that, he left a jar of his preserved plums, the ones he made every autumn when the fruit hung heavy on the trees behind the bakery. The day after that, he found a small pot of fresh butter beneath his step, pale and creamy and flecked with salt crystals. And so it went, day after day, each of them leaving gifts for the other in secret, a peculiar courtship conducted entirely through food and without a single word spoken. Adrian found himself thinking about what to leave next with the giddy anticipation of a boy planning a surprise, and he took absurd pleasure in the knowledge that somewhere in the village, the orc woman was doing the same. He left her jam tarts and spiced biscuits and a loaf of his own sourdough, made from a starter his father had brought from the old country and kept alive for 40 years. She left him oat cakes and soft pretzels dusted with coarse salt, and once, memorably, a pie filled with early strawberries that tasted like sunlight and summer, and every good thing Adrian had ever wanted. Mira noticed the change in him, the way he hummed while he worked and smiled at nothing in particular, and she watched him with the shrewd, unblinking gaze of a child who knows her parent is up to something. "You've been sneaking out at night," she announced one morning over breakfast, pointing her spoon at him accusingly. "I heard you on the stairs." Adrian tried to look innocent. "I've been checking the ovens. You know how temperamental they get. The ovens don't make you smile like that." "I smile all the time. Not like that. Like you have a secret and it's a good one." Mira leaned forward, her eyes bright with curiosity. "Is it because of the orc girl?" Adrian nearly choked on his tea. "What makes you think it has anything to do with an orc?" "Because I saw her yesterday morning. I woke up early and looked out the window and there she was, putting bread under the step. She has green skin and pointy ears and she's really pretty, Papa. Is she your friend?" Adrian set his cup down carefully, buying himself a moment to think. He had not intended for Mira to know, not yet, but he should have realized his daughter was too observant to miss what was happening. And perhaps it was better this way. Perhaps it was time to stop pretending this was something casual and meaningless. "I don't know if we're friends," he said slowly. "I've never actually spoken to her, but I think she's been very kind, leaving us all that bread, so I've been leaving her things in return. That's all." "That's not all," Mira said with the confidence of someone who has seen straight through a flimsy excuse. "You like her." The way Mama said you liked her when you first met." Adrian felt his throat tighten. His wife had been gone 3 years, taken by a fever that had swept through the village one bitter winter, and he had thought he was doing well, raising Mira alone and keeping the bakery running and moving forward one day at a time. But the truth was he had been lonely, and he had been lonely for so long that he had almost forgotten what it felt like to look forward to something beyond the next loaf of bread or the next market day. The orc woman's gifts had woken something in him, some long dormant hope that perhaps life could hold more than simple survival. "Maybe I do," he admitted quietly. "Is that all right with you, Mouse?" Mira considered this with the seriousness it deserved, her small face solemn. Then she nodded. "I think it's all right, but you should talk to her, Papa. It's weird to just leave food for each other forever. What if she doesn't know you like her? Oh, I think she might have figured it out by now. But what if she hasn't? You should tell her." "Mama always said it's important to use your words." Adrian laughed, a sound that came easier than it had in years. "Your mother was a wise woman, all right. I'll talk to her, I promise." But talking to her, he discovered, was easier said than done. The orc woman was as elusive as smoke, slipping in and out of the village on errands he could never quite track, and the few times he tried to position himself to intercept her morning visits, she seemed to sense his presence and stayed away. It became a game, almost, a dance of near misses and careful timing, and Adrian found himself both frustrated and charmed by her caution. He asked about her more openly now, no longer pretending his interest was casual. The miller, he learned, was named Zara Jorvik, and she had come to Millcrest 5 years ago after purchasing the old mill from the previous owner's widow. She lived alone, grinding grain for anyone willing to buy from an orc, and the general consensus in the village was that she kept to herself and caused no trouble, which was about the best an orc could hope for in human territory. "She's a hard worker, I'll give her that," said Mistress Halloran, the butcher's wife, when Adrian stopped by to buy sausages for supper. "But I wouldn't trust her flour myself. Who knows what kind of grain she's using? Could be anything." "I've bought from her a few times," Adrian said mildly, which was not precisely true but might be soon. "The flour seemed fine to me." Mistress Halloran sniffed. "Well, you're braver than most then. My Harold won't go near the place, says it feels wrong buying from one of them. Not that I blame him, mind you. It's hard to forget what they did during the war." Adrian, who had been a child during the war and whose memories consisted mostly of his mother crying in the kitchen and his father coming home with a limp he would carry for the rest of his life, did not point out that orcs had also lost people and homes and futures in that same bloody conflict. Instead, he paid for his sausages and left, his mind churning with frustration and a growing sense of clarity. Zara was baking in secret because she had no other choice. No one in Millcrest would buy bread from an orc, no matter how good it was, and so all her skill and effort went to waste, ground into flour no one wanted and baked into loaves no one would eat. She had been leaving bread at his door not because she expected anything in return, but because she could not bear to see it go uneaten, and perhaps because she had wanted someone, anyone, to taste her work and know it was good. The thought made something fierce and protective rise in Adrian's chest, and he walked home with his jaw set and his mind made up. If Zara would not let him catch her in the alley, he would simply have to go to the mill and speak to her directly. It was the only way forward, and if he was honest with himself, it was long overdue. He left Mira with a neighbor the next afternoon, claiming errands that required an unencumbered adult, and set out for the mill with a basket of fresh rolls tucked under his arm. The day was warm and bright. the kind of spring afternoon that made the whole world seem scrubbed clean and full of possibility. And Adrian tried not to think too hard about what he was going to say when he arrived. He had never been good at planned speeches. He did better when he could simply talk, letting the words find their own shape. The mill looked less forlorn in the daylight, though no less worn. The water wheel turned steadily, and there was smoke rising from the chimney in a thicker plume than he had seen before, suggesting someone was home and working. Adrian climbed the 3 steps to the door and knocked, his heart hammering in his chest like a baker's apprentice attempting his first sourdough. For a long moment, there was no answer. Then the door opened a crack and a green face peered out at him, eyes wide and wary. "Yes." Zara's voice was low and cautious, with the faint guttural accent common to orcs who had learned human speech as a second language. "Can I help you?" Adrian held up the basket. "I brought you rolls. I thought maybe we could talk." Zara stared at him for a heartbeat, then at the basket, and then back at his face. Her expression was difficult to read, caught somewhere between confusion and something that might have been panic. "Talk about what?" "About bread," Adrian said and smiled. "And about why you've been leaving yours under my back step every morning for the past month." The green face went, improbably, a shade darker, and Zara made a noise that might have been a laugh or a groan. "You knew. I saw you, about 2 weeks ago. I've been trying to catch you ever since, but you're very good at not being caught. I am good at not being seen, yes." Zara hesitated, her hand still gripping the edge of the door as though she might slam it shut at any moment. "You did not have to bring me anything. I did not leave the bread because I wanted payment. I know. But I wanted to. And I wanted to meet you properly, instead of just playing this strange game where we leave food for each other and never actually speak." Zara studied him for a long moment, her eyes brown and dark and unexpectedly soft, searching his face for something. Whatever she found must have satisfied her, because she stepped back and opened the door wider. "All right. Come in, then, but I do not have much to offer you." I was not expecting company. The interior of the mill was dim and cool, smelling of grain and wood smoke, and the faint yeasty tang of rising dough. It was a single large room, with the grinding stones taking up most of the floor space, and a small living area tucked into one corner, a pallet bed, a table and 2 chairs. A fireplace with a kettle hung over the flames. There were sacks of grain stacked along one wall, and drying herbs hung from the rafters, and in the corner by the window was a work table covered in the unmistakable evidence of a baker's craft. Bowls and wooden spoons and a mound of dough resting beneath a damp cloth. Adrian set his basket on the table and looked around with undisguised curiosity. "This is where you've been baking all those loaves?" "Yes." Zara moved to the fireplace and busied herself with the kettle, not quite looking at him. "The heat from the grinding stones keeps the room warm, which is good for proofing. And I have flour, obviously, so you bake." "I bake." She poured water into 2 chipped mugs and handed one to him, her movements quick and precise. "I learned from my mother. She was a baker in the southern holds, before the war. She taught me everything she knew, and when I came here and bought the mill, I thought perhaps I could do both grind flour and bake bread and sell them together. But no one wants bread from an orc. They barely tolerate buying flour from me, and only because the other mills are too far away to be convenient." Adrian sipped his water, which was cool and clean, drawn from the river that powered the wheel. "So you've been baking anyway, even though you have no one to sell to?" "I have been baking because I cannot stop," Zara said, and there was something raw in her voice, something Adrian recognized because he had felt it himself in the months after his wife died. The need to keep his hands busy and his mind occupied lest the grief swallow him whole. I have flour and I have skill, and if I do not use them, what is the point of any of this? So I bake. And I leave the loaves where someone might find them and eat them, because it is better than letting them go to waste. You left them at my bakery, Adrian said gently. Of all the places in Millcrest, you chose mine. Why? Zara turned to face him fully, and for the first time Adrian got a good look at her in proper light. She was not tall, perhaps a hand's breadth shorter than he was, though still taller than most human women he knew, and her build was lean and strong, the kind of strength that came from hard physical work rather than deliberate training. Her face was angular, with high cheekbones and a firm jawline, and her tusks were small and neat, barely protruding past her upper lip. She was, he realized with a jolt that went straight to his stomach, beautiful in a way he had not expected and could not quite define. Because you are good, she said simply. Your bread is the best in Millcrest. I have tasted it. I buy a loaf sometimes when I come to market early and no one is watching. And I thought, if I must leave my work somewhere, let it be with someone who will understand what went into it. Someone who will know that it is good, even if he does not know who made it. Adrian set his mug down, his hand suddenly unsteady. I did know. I knew from the first loaf that whoever baked it understood bread the way I do, and I wanted to meet you. I wanted to know who you were and why you were doing this, and I wanted to thank you. You have been thanking me, Zara pointed out, and now there was a hint of humor in her voice, a lightness that eased the tension in the room. Honey cakes, jam tarts. That sourdough, which was the best I have ever tasted, and I say that knowing my own mother's recipe. You do not owe me anything more than that. What if I want to give you more? The words hung in the air between them, weighted with implication, and Zara went very still. What do you mean? Adrian took a breath and decided to be honest, because his daughter was right, and his late wife would have been proud, and he was done with hiding things that mattered. I mean that I have been thinking about you every day since I saw you in the alley. I mean that I look forward to finding your bread under my step the way I used to look forward to festivals when I was a boy. I mean that I would like to know you better, if you will let me. Not as the orc who leaves me bread, but as Zara, who bakes because she cannot stop and who deserves to have her work appreciated by more than just one grateful baker. Zara stared at him, her expression cycling through surprise and disbelief and something that might have been hope, fragile and tentative. You do not know me. You do not know what people will say if they see us together. I know what they will say, and I do not care. Let them talk. It is easy to say that when you are human and you have a place in this village. It is harder when you are orc and barely tolerated. Zara's voice was steady, but there was pain beneath it, old and deep. I have lived here 5 years and I am still a stranger. If I align myself with you, it will only make things worse, for both of us. Or it will make things better, Adrian countered. Zara, no one in this village knows you can bake the way you do. They think of you as the orc who runs the mill, and they do not look any further than that. But if we worked together, if your flour became my bread, openly, and we let people see what you are capable of, maybe they would start to look at you differently. Maybe they would see what I see. And what do you see? Someone who takes pride in her work. Someone who gives gifts in secret because she would rather feed others than let her effort go to waste. Someone I would very much like to get to know, if she is willing to take the risk. Zara looked at him for a long time, her dark eyes searching his face as though trying to read the truth of his intentions in the lines around his mouth and the set of his jaw. Then, slowly, she smiled, a small, cautious thing, but real. You are either very brave or very foolish, Adrian Quincy. Probably both. My daughter says I have terrible judgment. Your daughter is the little one with the curls. I have seen her in the village. She looks like she has good judgment, she does. which is why I am choosing to listen to her advice and talk to you instead of just leaving pastries on your doorstep forever." Zara laughed, a sound that was low and warm and surprised her as much as it surprised Adrian. All right, you have convinced me. We can try this, whatever this is. But I warn you, I am not easy to know. I have been alone a long time and I do not have much practice at being otherwise." "Neither do I," Adrian admitted. "But I think we can figure it out together, starting with this. Will you come to the bakery tomorrow? Bring flour, bring dough, bring whatever you want. We will bake together and you can show me what you have been making in secret. And then, if it goes well, we will do it again. And again. Until people stop seeing an orc at the mill and start seeing Zara, the baker." Zara's smile widened, and Adrian felt his heart do something complicated and entirely welcome in his chest. "You are serious, completely serious. I make very good bread, but I think we could make even better bread together. And I think you deserve to have people know your name for the right reasons." "Then I will come tomorrow," Zara said. "But if your neighbors chase me off with pitchforks, I am blaming you." "Fair enough. I will bring the bandages." They stood there for a moment, grinning at each other like fools, and then Adrian remembered the basket of rolls he had brought and offered them to Zara, who accepted with a kind of solemn gratitude that made his throat tighten. She bit into one, her eyes closing briefly in appreciation, and when she looked at him again there was something in her expression that had not been there before: trust, tentative but present, and the beginning of something that might become more if they were careful and patient and willing to take the risk. Adrian left the mill as the sun was beginning to sink toward the horizon, his heart lighter than it had been in years. He collected Mira from the neighbor's house and walked home with her chattering beside him, and when she asked if he had talked to the orc girl, he said yes, he had, and they were going to bake together tomorrow. Mira's face lit up like the sun. "Really? Can I come watch? We will see. Maybe if Zara does not mind an audience. I will be very quiet, I promise. I just want to see what she makes. And I want to make sure she knows we are nice, Papa. She might be scared." Adrian thought of the way Zara had stood in her mill, surrounded by the tools of her trade and the evidence of her skill, and the way she had smiled when she agreed to come to the bakery. "I do not think she is scared, Mouse. Cautious, maybe, but not scared. She is braver than she thinks." "Like you," Mira said, and squeezed his hand. Zara arrived at the bakery just after dawn, carrying a heavy sack of flour slung over one shoulder and a basket covered with a cloth in her other hand. Adrian had been awake for hours, too restless to sleep, and he had the ovens already heating and the work table cleared in anticipation. He opened the door before Zara could knock, and her eyebrows rose in surprise. "You were waiting for me." "I was. Come in. Let me take that sack, it looks heavy." "I am strong. I can carry it." But she let him take it anyway, and Adrian pretended not to notice the way she flexed her fingers as though they had been cramping from the weight. He set the sack against the wall and turned to find Zara looking around the bakery with an expression he could not quite read. "This is a good space," she said after a moment. "You have room to work, and your ovens are beautiful. Are they the stone-lined kind?" "They are. My father built them when he first opened the bakery. They hold heat better than anything I have ever used." Adrian gestured to the work table. "What did you bring?" Zara set the basket down and pulled back the cloth to reveal several small rounds of dough, already shaped and resting. "I thought we could bake these together. They are a recipe from my mother, a spiced flatbread that is eaten hot, with butter or honey or just plain. I have not made them in a long time, because there was no one to share them with. But I thought, if we are doing this, we should start with something that means something to me." Adrian felt a lump rise in his throat. "I would be honored to help you make them. Show me what to do." They worked side by side as the sun climbed higher, and the bakery filled with warmth and the smell of baking bread. Zara moved with the efficient grace of someone who had spent years honing her craft, her hands quick and sure as she shaped the dough and explained the process in a low, steady voice. Adrian listened and watched and contributed where he could, and gradually the initial awkwardness between them eased into something more comfortable, a rhythm that felt natural and right. Mira appeared halfway through the morning, rubbing sleep from her eyes and stopping short when she saw Zara standing at the work table. For a moment, child and orc regarded each other in silence, and Adrian held his breath, hoping his daughter's curiosity would win out over any fear. Then Mira smiled, bright and unguarded. "You are the orc girl who leaves the bread. I am Mira. It is nice to meet you." Zara blinked, clearly caught off guard, and then smiled back. "It is nice to meet you too, Mira. I am Zara." "I know. Papa told me. He says you are a very good baker." "Your papa is kind. He is a very good baker himself." "I know that too. He taught me how to braid dough, but I am not very good at it yet. Maybe you could teach me, if you have time, I mean, and if you want to." Zara glanced at Adrian, who shrugged with a smile. "If you do not mind an apprentice, I think she would love that." "I do not mind," Zara said, and there was something soft in her voice, a warmth that made Adrian's chest ache. "Come here, Mira. I will show you how I learned to braid." They spent the rest of the morning baking together, the three of them. And by the time the first customers began arriving for the day's bread, the bakery was filled with the scent of Zara's spiced flatbreads and the sound of Mira's laughter. Adrian served the early customers himself, and he saw the way their eyes lingered on Zara, standing at the work table with flour dusting her green hands, but no one said anything. They bought their bread and left, and Adrian let out a breath he had not realized he was holding. "That went better than I expected," Zara said quietly, once the door had closed behind the last customer. "People are curious, not hostile. That is a good start. Or they are waiting to see what you are doing before they decide how to react. Maybe. But I think we gave them something to think about. And if we keep doing this day after day, eventually it will just be normal. You will just be the baker who works with me, not the orc who should not be here." Zara smiled, small and hopeful. "I would like that." Over the following weeks, Zara became a fixture at the bakery. She arrived each morning with flour or dough or new recipes she wanted to try, and she and Adrian worked side by side, their partnership deepening with each shared loaf and each quiet conversation. Mira adopted Zara with the wholehearted enthusiasm of a child who has decided someone is important, trailing after her and asking endless questions about orc baking techniques, and whether it was true that orcs could eat raw grain without getting sick, and what Zara's favorite color was. Zara answered every question with patience and humor, and Adrian watched the way she softened around his daughter, the way her smiles came easier and her laughter rang out more freely. He watched, and he felt himself falling, slow and steady and inevitable, into something that felt terrifyingly like love. The village's reaction was mixed. Some customers stopped coming, declaring loudly that they would not buy bread touched by orc hands, and Adrian wished them well and did not argue. Others were curious, lingering to ask questions or sample the new recipes. Zara introduced savory herb breads and sweet rolls filled with dried fruit and dense, hearty loaves that stayed fresh for days. A few were openly approving, like old Tam the blacksmith, who declared that anyone who could bake bread that good deserved respect, regardless of what color their skin was. "You are doing a good thing here, lad," Tam said one afternoon, leaning against the counter with a meat pie in one massive hand. That girl has been wasting her talents at the mill, and it is about time someone noticed. Your father would be proud." Adrian, who thought of his father often but rarely spoke of him, felt his throat tighten. "Thank you, Tam. That means a lot. Just do not let the fools get to you. There will always be people who cannot see past their own noses. But you have more friends in this village than you might think, and most of us have been eating orc grain for years without complaint. No reason we cannot eat orc bread too." Tam's words proved true. Slowly, cautiously, the tide of opinion began to shift. Customers returned, some sheepish and some defiant, and the bakery began to see more traffic than it had in years. Zara's presence was no longer a scandal but a curiosity, and then, gradually, simply a fact. She was the baker who worked with Adrian Quincy, and her bread was exceptional. And that was all that mattered. Through it all, Adrian and Zara grew closer. They talked while they worked, sharing stories of their pasts and their hopes for the future. Zara spoke of her mother, who had died when Zara was 16, leaving her alone and adrift in a world that had little use for orphaned orc girls. Adrian spoke of his wife, of the love they had shared and the grief that had nearly broken him, and the slow, painful process of learning to live again. "I did not think I would want this again," he admitted one evening as they cleaned the kitchen together, the day's work finally done and Mira asleep upstairs. "After she died, I thought that part of my life was over, that I had had my chance at happiness, and I should be grateful for the time I had and not ask for more." Zara paused in her scrubbing, her hands stilling in the soapy water. "And now I think I was wrong. I think we are allowed to have more than one chance if we are brave enough to take it." Adrian set down the towel he had been using and crossed to stand beside her, close enough that he could see the exact shade of her eyes in the lamplight. "Zara, I care about you, more than I probably should, given how short a time we have known each other. But I do, and I do not want to pretend otherwise." Zara turned to face him fully, her expression unreadable. "Adrian, I care about you too. But you must understand, if we do this, if we let this be more than friendship, it will not be easy. People will talk. They will judge. Your business could suffer. It could. Or it could thrive, because people will come from miles around to taste the bread made by the human and the orc who dared to work together." Adrian reached out and took her hand, his fingers lacing through hers, flour and water and years of work making them mirror images. "I am not afraid of hard, Zara. I am only afraid of not trying." Zara looked down at their joined hands, and when she looked up again, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "You are the strangest man I have ever met, Adrian Quincy, and I think I might be falling in love with you." "Good," Adrian said and kissed her. It was not a perfect kiss. Their tusks made the angle awkward, and they both tasted of flour and exhaustion, and Zara laughed halfway through in a way that made Adrian laugh too. But it was real, and it was theirs, and when they finally pulled apart, Adrian felt lighter than he had in years. "So what happens now?" Zara asked, her voice soft and wondering. "Now we keep baking," Adrian said, "together, and we see where this goes." Where it went, as it turned out, was toward a future neither of them had quite dared to imagine. They continued to work side by side, and their partnership, both professional and personal, became the subject of much gossip and even more admiration. The bakery thrived, and Zara's mill became part of the operation, grinding the grain that became the flour that became the bread that fed half the village and travelers from up and down the trade road. Mira, delighted by the turn of events, appointed herself Zara's official assistant and could often be found at the mill, helping to measure grain or sweep flour from the floor, or simply sitting in the corner with a book while Zara worked. She called Zara Z, with the unself-conscious affection of a child who has decided someone is family. And Zara accepted the nickname and the role with a grace that made Adrian's heart swell. "She is wonderful," Zara said one night as she and Adrian sat together on the bench outside the bakery, watching the stars emerge in the deepening twilight. "Your daughter. She is bright and kind and so full of life. You have done well with her." "We did well with her," Adrian corrected gently. "Her mother and now you, if you want to be part of that." Zara leaned her head against his shoulder and Adrian wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close. "I want to be part of it. I want to be part of all of this. I did not know I could have this, Adrian. I did not know I was allowed to want it." "You are allowed to want anything you want," Adrian said fiercely. "And I will do everything in my power to make sure you have it." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the village settling down to sleep. Then Zara stirred, lifting her head to look at him. "I have been thinking," she said, "about the mill, about the bakery, about us. And I think we should make this official, not just working together but truly together, combine the businesses, put both our names on the sign. Let everyone know that this is not just a temporary arrangement but a partnership, a real one." Adrian felt his pulse quicken. "Are you saying what I think you are saying?" "I am saying that I love you, Adrian Quincy, and I want to build a life with you if you will have me. I want to wake up every morning and bake bread with you, and go to sleep every night knowing that I am not alone anymore. I want to be part of your family, and I want you to be part of mine, even if my family is just me and the memories of my mother, and the hope that we can make something new together." Adrian cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away the tears that had started to spill down her cheeks. "I will have you, Zara Jorvik. I will have you today and tomorrow and every day after that for as long as you will let me. And yes, let us make it official. Let us build something together that will last. Then we are agreed." Zara smiled through her tears, radiant and beautiful and entirely his. "We are partners, in bread, in business, and in life." "In everything," Adrian agreed and kissed her again, sealing the promise. The next morning they told Mira over breakfast. The little girl squealed with delight, threw her arms around Zara's neck, and declared that she had known this was going to happen because she was very wise and also because Adrian smiled like a fool every time he looked at Zara. "Can I call you Mama Z?" Mira asked, pulling back to look at Zara with wide, hopeful eyes. "I know you are not my real mama, but I love you and I think it would be nice to have a mama again. If you do not mind, I mean." Zara, who had been holding herself together admirably, promptly burst into tears and pulled Mira into a hug so tight the girl squeaked. "I would be honored," she managed, her voice thick. "I would be so honored, Mira. Yes, you can call me Mama Z." Adrian watched the two most important people in his life embrace, and he felt his own eyes sting. He had thought his life was settled, that he knew what the future held: steady work, quiet days, the slow passage of time measured in loaves and seasons. But he had been wrong. The future held this: love, unexpected and fierce and entirely worth the risk. A family, rebuilt from grief and loneliness and the courage to reach out for something more. A partnership that would feed not just bodies but souls, filling the empty spaces with warmth and laughter and the daily miracle of shared work and shared joy. They spent the next few weeks planning. The mill and the bakery were formally merged, with a new sign painted and hung above the door that read Quincy and Jorvik, bakers and millers. Zara moved out of the mill and into the rooms above the bakery, and her few possessions were integrated into the space with an ease that suggested they had always belonged there. Mira helped arrange Zara's books on the shelf and declared that now the house felt complete. The official reopening of the combined business was set for market day, and Adrian and Zara worked feverishly to prepare. They baked for 3 days straight, filling every available surface with loaves and rolls and pastries and the spiced flatbreads that had become a signature of their partnership. They set up tables in the square, and Mira made signs with careful lettering that announced the new venture and invited people to sample the wares. Market day dawned bright and clear, and by the time the sun had fully risen, a crowd had gathered around their tables. Some came out of curiosity, some out of loyalty, and some out of a simple desire for good bread, but they came, and they tasted, and they approved. The spiced flatbread sold out within the first hour. The honey cakes were gone by midday. By the time the market closed, Adrian and Zara had sold every last loaf and roll, and they had a waiting list of orders for the following week that would keep them busy for a month. "I cannot believe it," Zara said that evening as they sat together in the kitchen, too exhausted to do more than sip tea and stare at the empty baskets. "I cannot believe they bought everything. I cannot believe this worked." "I told you it would," Adrian said, though his own amazement was evident in his voice. "People know quality when they taste it, and we gave them something they could not get anywhere else, not just good bread, but bread made with care and partnership and the kind of love that shows in every bite." "You are a poet, Adrian Quincy. I am a baker in love. It is much the same thing." Zara laughed, and Mira, who had been dozing in the corner, stirred and mumbled something about bread before falling back asleep. Adrian looked at his daughter, then at Zara, and felt a contentment so deep it was almost painful. This was what he had been missing. This sense of wholeness, of being exactly where he was meant to be with exactly the people he was meant to be with. It had taken years and grief, and the unexpected gift of an orc woman's bread to get here, but he had arrived, and he was not going anywhere. The months that followed were busy and joyful and occasionally chaotic. The bakery became a fixture in the village, known not just for the quality of its bread, but for the story behind it, the human baker and the orc miller who had found each other through hidden loaves and mutual respect. Travelers began to stop specifically to taste their bread, and word spread up and down the trade road that Milcrest had something special worth seeking out. Zara flourished in ways Adrian had not anticipated. She had always been skilled, but now, with an audience that appreciated her work and a partner who supported her, she became bold, experimenting with new recipes and techniques and creating breads that people traveled for days to buy. She began teaching, too, offering lessons to anyone interested in learning the craft, and her students both human and orc, for word had spread to the southern hold spoke of her with reverence. Adrian found his own joy in watching her grow, in being the steady presence that allowed her to take risks, and in the daily miracle of working beside someone who understood him in ways he had not known he needed. They argued sometimes about recipes or business decisions or the correct temperature for proofing dough, but they always resolved it, and the making up was invariably worth the conflict. Mira grew too, shooting up in height and developing a passion for numbers that suggested she might one day take over the business side of the bakery. She adored Zara with the uncomplicated love of a child who has been given a second chance at family. And Zara returned that love in full measure, teaching Mira to braid dough and read grain quality and navigate the world with the confidence of someone who knows she is valued. One evening in late autumn, as the first frost silvered the grass and the harvest had been brought in and stored, Adrian and Zara stood together in the alley behind the bakery. The place where it had all begun, where Zara had left her first loaf and Adrian had found the mystery that would change his life. You ever think about how unlikely this all was? Zara asked, leaning against him in the comfortable way of people who have learned to fit their bodies together. I was trying to be invisible. You were trying to be content, and yet here we are. Here we are, Adrian agreed. Together, because you were brave enough to leave bread where someone might find it, and I was curious enough to look. I was not brave, I was desperate. There is a difference. You were both, and you still are, and I love you for it. Zara tilted her head to look up at him, her eyes warm in the fading light. I love you too, Adrian. I love this life we have built. I love that your daughter calls me Mama Z and means it. I love that we have made a place where orcs and humans can work together and no one thinks it is strange anymore. I love that we did this together. What do you say we make it permanent? Adrian asked, his heart suddenly pounding. He had not planned this, but the words felt right, necessary, the only possible next step. Marry me, Zara. Let us make this official in every way that matters. Let us stand up in front of the village and promise to be partners for the rest of our lives. Zara stared at him, her mouth opening and closing soundlessly. Then she laughed, bright and disbelieving. You are asking me to marry you, in an alley, behind a bakery. I am asking you to marry me in the place where this all started. Where you left me bread and I found the courage to look for you. It seems fitting. It is ridiculous. Is that a yes? It is a yes, you ridiculous man. Yes, I will marry you. Yes, I will stand up in front of everyone and promise to be your partner and your wife and whatever else you need me to be. Yes to all of it. Adrian kissed her, long and deep and full of promise, and when they finally broke apart, they were both grinning like idiots. They went inside to tell Mira, who shrieked with excitement, and immediately began planning the wedding with the kind of intense focus usually reserved for military campaigns. They were married 6 weeks later, in a small ceremony held in the bakery itself, surrounded by friends and customers and the scent of fresh bread. Zara wore a simple green dress that matched her skin and a wreath of autumn leaves in her hair. Adrian wore his best shirt and could not stop smiling. Mira stood between them, holding both their hands, and declared them married before the priest could finish the official words. No one objected. No one protested. The village had come to accept, and then to celebrate, the partnership that had grown from hidden loaves and quiet courage into something undeniable and true. They honeymooned at the bakery, because neither of them could bear to leave the work for long, and spent their first night as a married couple baking a batch of Zara's spiced flatbreads and Adrian's honey cakes, laughing and feeding each other bites and making love in the quiet hours before dawn when the ovens were warm and the world was still. Life continued, as it always does, with its joys and challenges and small daily miracles. The bakery thrived. Zara's reputation grew, and she began to receive invitations to teach at other mills and bakeries, which she accepted with Adrian's enthusiastic support. Mira grew older and more capable, eventually taking on more responsibility in the business, and proving to have a head for numbers and negotiation that rivaled her father's skill with dough. And one spring morning, nearly 2 years after the wedding, Zara came downstairs with a particular glow in her cheeks and a piece of news that made Adrian drop the rolling pin he had been holding. I am pregnant, she said simply, and Adrian let out a whoop of joy that woke Mira upstairs and probably half the village besides. Their daughter was born in the dead of winter, a small, perfect creature with green skin and Adrian's sandy hair, and a set of lungs that suggested she would never have trouble making herself heard. They named her Vela, after Zara's mother, and Mira took to her role as big sister with the same enthusiasm she brought to everything else. Vela grew up surrounded by flour and laughter, and the steady rhythm of bread making, and by the time she was old enough to hold a wooden spoon, she was helping in the bakery alongside her parents and sister. She had her mother's skill with dough and her father's easy charm, and she moved between the human and orc communities with the unconscious ease of someone who had never been taught to see a difference. Adrian and Zara grew older together, their hair silvering and their hands developing the calluses and scars of a lifetime spent working. But they never stopped baking, never stopped finding joy in the daily ritual of turning flour and water and yeast into something that nourished and sustained. They never stopped being partners in every sense of the word, and their love, which had begun with hidden loaves and secret gifts, only deepened with time. On their 10th anniversary, Adrian woke early and slipped out of bed, careful not to wake Zara. He went downstairs to the bakery and baked a loaf of bread, the same kind Zara had left under his step all those years ago, and he wrapped it carefully and tucked it beneath the back step, where the gap still remained, a reminder of how it had all begun. When Zara found it an hour later, she laughed until she cried. And then she kissed him and called him a sentimental fool, and they spent the rest of the day baking together, their daughters helping, and the bakery filled with warmth, and the scent of good bread, and the kind of love that endures. Years later, when Mira had taken over the business, and Vela was apprenticing at a bakery in the capital, Adrian and Zara sat together in the garden behind the bakery, watching the sun set and listening to the sounds of the village settling down for the night. They were old now, their bodies creaky and tired, but their hands were still strong enough to knead dough, and their hearts were still full. "You remember the first time I left you bread?" Zara asked, her head resting on Adrian's shoulder. "Every detail," Adrian said. "Mira found it and asked why the orc girl's bread was hidden there, and I invited you to stay. You did more than invite me to stay. You gave me a life, a family, a purpose." "We gave each other those things," Adrian corrected gently. "You were brave enough to leave the bread. I was lucky enough to find it, and we were both smart enough to take the risk." Zara smiled, and Adrian felt her hand find his, their fingers lacing together in the familiar, comfortable way of people who have spent a lifetime learning each other's shapes. They sat in silence as the stars began to emerge one by one in the darkening sky, and they were content. The bakery still stands in Millcrest, run now by Adrian and Zara's descendants, and it is still known for the quality of its bread and the story behind it. Travelers still stop to taste the spiced flatbreads and honey cakes, and they leave with full bellies and the knowledge that sometimes the most extraordinary things begin with the smallest gestures: a loaf of bread, left in secret, and the courage to ask why. Adrian and Zara lived to see their grandchildren learn to bake, and they lived to see the world change in small but significant ways, as more humans and orcs found common ground and built partnerships that defied old prejudices. They lived long, full lives, rich with work and love, and the daily satisfaction of creating something beautiful and necessary. And when they finally passed within months of each other, as such couples often do, they were buried together in the village cemetery, beneath a stone that reads simply, "Adrian Quincy and Zara Jorvik, bakers and partners, who taught us that the best things in life are made with care, shared with joy, and given freely." The bakery continues, the mill still turns, and every morning, without fail, there is fresh bread waiting for the village to wake to. And if sometimes, on quiet mornings when the mist rises from the river and the world feels hushed and expectant, a traveler claims to catch the scent of spiced flatbreads and honey cakes drifting from the alley behind the bakery, well, perhaps that is just the memory of two people who loved each other enough to change the world, one loaf at a time. The story of Adrian and Zara became legend in Millcrest, told and retold until the details blurred into myth. But the truth remained, solid and real as fresh bread. That love can begin in the most unlikely places, that courage is often quiet and unassuming, and that the best partnerships are built not on grand gestures but on the daily choice to show up, work hard, and care for each other through all the small moments that make up a life. Their daughters carried on the tradition, teaching their own children the recipes and techniques that had been passed down, and the bakery remained a place where humans and orcs worked side by side, where differences were celebrated rather than feared, and where everyone was welcome at the table. And in the end, that was perhaps the greatest gift Adrian and Zara gave to Milcrest. Not just good bread, though there was plenty of that, but the example of two people who dared to see past fear and prejudice to the fundamental truth that we are all more alike than different, all hungry for connection and meaning and the simple comfort of breaking bread together. The loaves continue to rise, the ovens continue to glow, and in the quiet moments before dawn, when the bakery is filled with warmth and the smell of baking bread, it is easy to imagine that somewhere, Adrian and Zara are still working side by side, their hands covered in flour, their hearts full of love, creating something beautiful and lasting that will nourish generations yet to come. This is how love endures, not in grand pronouncements or dramatic gestures, but in the daily work of showing up, of choosing each other, of creating something together that is greater than the sum of its parts. This is how change happens, slowly, steadily, one loaf at a time, until what once seemed impossible becomes simply the way things are. And this is how a story ends, not with fanfare or drama, but with the quiet satisfaction of knowing that the work was good, the love was real, and the legacy will continue long after the last loaf has been baked and the last fire has gone cold in the ovens. Adrian and Zara's story is finished, but the bakery remains, a testament to what they built and what they believed. And every morning, when the first customers arrive to find the shelves full of fresh bread and the air rich with the scent of baking, they are reminded that the best things in life are made with care, shared with joy, and given freely, just like the first loaf an orc woman left beneath a baker's step, wrapped in homespun and warm with hope.